Why did South Africa give up its nuclear weapons? South Africa holds a unique place in history as the only nation to have voluntarily and unilaterally dismantled its own nuclear weapons. While other countries, such as Ukraine, have relinquished nuclear arsenals, those were inherited from the Soviet Union and not independently developed. South Africa, however, built its nuclear weapons program from scratch and then chose to abandon it. This raises an important question. Why did South Africa give up its nuclear weapons? To understand this, we need to delve into the historical context. By the 1970s, South Africa's global standing was complex. The country was governed by a white minority regime that enforced apartheid, a system of racial segregation that severely restricted the rights and freedoms of the black majority. This oppressive system strained relations with neighboring countries, with the exception of Rhodesia. Internationally, South Africa's relationships were also fraught. Its ties with the USSR and the communist world were consistently hostile, while its relations with the United States and the United Kingdom, initially strong in the 1960s, deteriorated over time. As the US moved away from its own segregationist policies, maintaining diplomatic ties with apartheid South Africa became increasingly untenable. By the 1970s, South Africa found itself largely isolated on the global stage. This isolation deepened when Portugal, a covert ally, withdrew from its African colonies, leaving South Africa even more isolated. It was this growing sense of isolation that ultimately led South Africa to pursue nuclear weapons. The government concluded that if its survival were ever threatened, it could not rely on the international community for support. The only way to ensure the nation's continued existence, they believed, was to develop a nuclear arsenal capable of deterring potential aggressors. South Africa had been involved in nuclear research since 1948, but this was initially focused on nuclear energy and the economic exploitation of its abundant uranium reserves. In 1965, with assistance from the United States, South Africa commissioned its first nuclear reactor. By 1970, Prime Minister John Vorster authorized the construction of a uranium enrichment facility, claiming it was solely for peaceful purposes, a claim that few believed. The late 1970s marked a turning point in South Africa's nuclear ambitions. The civil war in Angola, which saw Cuban forces backed by the USSR intervening, was perceived as a direct threat to South Africa's survival. In response, Prime Minister P.W. Botha accelerated the development of nuclear weapons. South Africa successfully produced its first nuclear weapon by November 1979. By 1989, the country had amassed a stockpile of 7 nuclear bombs, each comparable in sophistication and yield to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. That same year, F.W. de Klerk was elected president, and his administration prioritized ending South Africa's international isolation through internal reforms. Apartheid's days were numbered, and de Klerk aimed to ensure a peaceful transition to majority rule. This shift was crucial for reintegrating South Africa into the global community, especially as the Cold War had ended. Previously, the West had tolerated apartheid South Africa due to its staunch anti-communist stance, but with the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, this leverage disappeared. However, there was another critical factor driving the decision to dismantle the nuclear arsenal: the fear of transferring control of these weapons to a future black majority government. By the late 1980s, it was clear that apartheid was unsustainable, and the transition to majority rule was inevitable. The white minority government, which had long held power, was deeply apprehensive about how a black-led government might use or manage the country's nuclear capabilities. This fear stemmed from a lack of trust in the political intentions and stability of a future black majority government. The white minority worried that such a government might misuse the weapons, either by engaging in aggressive actions or by failing to secure them properly, potentially leading to catastrophic consequences. To prevent this scenario, the white-led government decided to eliminate the nuclear arsenal altogether before the transition of power. De Klerk believed that ending the nuclear program would facilitate South Africa's rehabilitation on the global stage and ensure a smoother transition to democracy. In 1990, he initiated the decommissioning of the country's nuclear weapons, and within a year, all 7 bombs were dismantled. 2 years later, he publicly announced that South Africa had previously possessed nuclear weapons but had voluntarily dismantled them. This decision made South Africa the first and only nation to unilaterally disarm its own nuclear arsenal, marking a historic moment in global politics. In summary, South Africa's decision to give up its nuclear weapons was driven by a combination of factors: the desire to end international isolation, the need to transition away from apartheid, the changing global dynamics after the Cold War, and the fear of transferring nuclear capabilities to a future black majority government. By dismantling its nuclear arsenal, South Africa not only addressed these concerns, but also took a significant step toward reintegrating into the global community and paving the way for a more inclusive and democratic future. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this exploration of South Africa's nuclear history insightful.